Okay, here we go. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to begin the session this morning, our workshop on municipal solar procurement. And to give the introduction, I will turn it over to Mr. Mark Policinski, OKI's CEO.
Thank you, Andy, and good morning to everybody, and welcome to this workshop. This is a part of a series of workshops that OKI has put together with our friends at SolSmart. Today, we're talking about a pathway for local governments, school districts, park districts to adopt solar. It's kind of an interesting moment because what this workshop is trying to accomplish is to take our zeal to adopt solar, our interest in prudent solutions to to reducing fossil fuels, and our continued dedication to spending public money wisely, all those things coming together in a way that could provide a win-win-win situation for everyone. The simple fact is that solar, as we all know, has incredible potential. But for local communities, the devil obviously is in the details. How do we get there from where we are is the question that we all face. Today, you have a panel of your peers, and this is a very important panel because these people have done it. These people can provide you guidance on how to do it. They will show you, I would hope, all the great things that come about. But I imagine that as they present to you, they're going to obviously display that it's not necessarily an easy process. But that's the real value of the panel in this workshop today, is how do we help you adopt solar? What are the practical problems that you'll face? And that's what the panel, I think, will give you great help in navigating. First on our agenda is Chad Laurent of the Cadmus Group. Chad is, of course, well known in the solar industry as an incredibly widely respected reputation. Chad is not new to OKI. He was instrumental in us pulling together our Solar Ready 2 project a few years ago. So we welcome Chad's return. But before I turn it over to Chad, I do want to thank Andy Meyer of our staff for his work in pulling this together. You know, Andy is just an extraordinarily gifted person. He's a great talent and an asset here at OKI in a variety of work that he has performed, a variety of projects, not the least of which is our work on our land use model. But I also want to thank Regina Fields for pulling this together technologically. She's a wizard at making this all happen, so I thank her. So I thank Andy and Regina for their hard work. So Chad, I'm going to turn it over to you, and for the rest of you, I hope you enjoy this great workshop. Thank you very much.
Wow, thanks, Mark. Thanks for the warm welcome and the fantastic introduction. It's really appreciated. It's great to be virtually back in Cincinnati. So let's see if I can get my slide sharing here. I think we're probably good to go. All right, great. Yeah, so thanks again. It's great to be back and glad to continue to be able to contribute to the solar efforts in the region. As Mark mentioned, I'm here representing SolSmart. So here's some, and I'm an attorney by training. So here's some legal disclaimers for your perusal at a later date. A little bit about SolSmart. So we're a national designation program that has been put together by the U.S. Department of Energy. We've been around for about 6 years, and we're very excited that the DOE is committed to continue the program for another 5 years, and we'll get the final details of what that program will look like, what the program will look like going forward in the fall. But communities take steps to make it easier to get solar installed in their communities, and then are designated and awarded and recognized by the DOE with SolSmart designation at the gold, silver, or bronze level. And then there's technical assistance like today available for free for communities that are participating in the program. So if you're part of a community that hasn't yet received SolSmart designation or is participating, please reach out to your colleagues at OKI, and we'll get you integrated into the program. Here are all the great organizations that are part of SolSmart. This just goes through, and I'll be sharing these slides. So I'm not reading through every slide here, but this can serve as a resource to everyone. But here's just some examples of the different credits and steps that you can take to receive designation, and then the value that provides to local governments in terms of reducing the barriers, the red tape, but making sure that there are proper permitting, inspection, zoning, and operational improvements put in place at the local level to help you be able to go solar. Also, as Mark mentioned, charting a path to clean energy and a solar energy future can be challenging. There's a lot of different things to navigate and different sort of regulatory contexts to consider, in particular when you're looking to procure solar. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the background about how you would go about purchasing clean energy, and then get into the specifics of solar procurement. So there's a lot of different procurement pathways when you're looking at going solar or getting solar installed or using solar energy. So the first is purchasing renewable energy certificates. If you have a REC, a renewable energy certificate, you're able to make the claim that you are powered by whatever renewable energy source created that renewable energy certificate. You can own and operate a system on local government property. You can participate in programs like community choice aggregation, which are available in some states. You can contract with an energy service company or a competitive supplier. Again, that's available in states like Ohio and states that are deregulated, but not in some other states. Some utilities and more these days are offering utility green tariff programs. So offering a particular product that they can sell to you that involves more renewable energy or a higher percentage of renewables. There's power purchase agreements, which is where a third party owns the system and then sells the electricity or the credits on the bill at a discount, typically to a local government or other customer. And then there are virtual or what are called financial PPAs. And I'll get into the details of each of these in turn. And then finally, community solar, which is an emerging opportunity for both local governments and others to participate in. So why is there interest in solar? Why would you want to install solar? So reducing emissions, not only greenhouse gas emissions, but also reducing emissions from coal and other fossil fuel generation that contributes to air pollution. It's to generate economic and financial benefits. So it can create local jobs for installers, but also as solar has decreased in cost, can save local governments money. It reduces our dependence on fossil fuels and also increases resilience. So when paired with storage or battery systems, solar has an opportunity to provide backup power and increase resilience in extreme weather events or other power outages. It displays leadership at the community level in clean energy. It can support broader health, environmental and social impact goals, creating energy where you're using it, and again, supporting or reducing the health impacts otherwise caused by burning fossil fuels. And then attaining price security and potential savings. So with the decreased cost of solar often can provide a financial benefit to communities that install it by saving on your energy bills over the lifetime of the system. So as I mentioned, the growth in solar has primarily been led by falling prices. So we've seen more than a 70% decrease in the cost of solar just over the past decade. I've been helping communities do procurement on solar since the early 2000s. And some of the first installed systems that I was helping local governments procure, the cost was around $12 a watt. And today those costs are more like between $2 and $3 a watt. So just an incredible savings or reduction in cost since the early 2000s and a significant decrease just in the last decade. And these are national averages. Obviously, each local market is slightly different, but on the whole, massive price decreases. So again, the local context is important in terms of what different procurement methods and what different renewable energy purchasing options are available to you. So these are just some quick maps showing what are referred to as regulated and deregulated. Deregulated is a bit of a misnomer because all utilities are still highly regulated. It really means that there's retail competition for the supply side of your electric bill. So there's retail choice in the quote unquote deregulated states. So other states have community choice aggregation. So that's the ability to aggregate demand across a large number of customers and then seek a competitive supply contract for that power. Again, Ohio is one of the states that has community choice aggregation. And then third-party ownership is allowed in some states as well in terms of power purchase agreements. Again, Ohio being one of those states. But not all of the states in the OKI region have the same sort of local or state level regulatory context as Ohio does. So the first and sort of simplest way to buy renewable energy or buy solar is to procure renewable energy certificates. Those certificates can be located in the region that you're operating in, or you can buy those RECs at the national market. And owning that renewable energy certificate means that you have the legal ability to say, I am buying that green power. However, just buying those RECs, many say it doesn't necessarily make that big of a difference. You don't have any savings from that purchase. It's just an additional cost. Whereas with a power purchase agreement or some of the others, you're able to recognize savings from solar. And also, there's a lot of questions around the phrase or the term additionality, meaning is your purchase actually making a difference? And so some would argue that if you're buying a renewable energy certificate from a wind project in Texas and not in any way supporting the underlying electrons that are produced from that project, are you really making a difference to get more renewable energy on the grid? So while you legally can say you're buying renewables, I think communities are looking for a lot of the other benefits of solar, such as price savings and resilience and local economic benefits and local pollution reduction benefits that you don't necessarily get from just a REC purchase. But there's a lot of nuance there. But that's sort of one of the simplest ways to buy solar or buy renewables. Owning and operate, which is I think what we'll one of the areas that we'll focus on here, is where local governments can purchase a solar PV system for themselves or through a PPA, which I'll get to in a minute. And that's typically a type of construction contract or procurement. The issue is where do you get the money to pay for the upfront costs to purchase that system? And so often that comes in the form of a bond or can be embedded in the construction costs of a new building, a new school, or a roof replacement project. Community choice aggregation. Again, this is allowed in Ohio, and these structures vary by state, but you're able to generally pool electric demand and then go out to a competitive supplier. And then what folks are doing these days is that instead of just looking for cost savings from that competitive supplier, different states and entities that are using CCAs are saying, and we want you as a competitive supplier to offer us a higher percentage of renewables in that community choice aggregation product. So that's another way that local governments can purchase renewables. This is just a little bit more specific. Rather than aggregating that demand, you can go out in the retail market to find a competitive supplier. And again, typically competitive supply contracts have really been focused on price and getting the lowest cost. Now, many local governments and other companies are saying we want lowest cost and we want more renewable energy embedded in what you're offering us in terms of a retail product in those states that are deregulated. So we're seeing those markets advance in the direction of, I want, fixed costs, I want savings, and I want it to come from renewables. And then we're also seeing the utilities offer what are referred to as green tariff programs. Some of the large users like Facebook and others have been able to work with their utilities to offer them a specific product that has a higher percentage of renewables and is often fixed and sometimes at a lower cost. And so the utility bundles renewable energy generation into that tariff. Tariff is the utility jargon for the electricity rate per kilowatt hour that they charge. So it's a specific rate that they would charge a customer that it has embedded renewable energy certificates and also a higher percentage of renewables and sometimes at a lower cost. So we've seen Facebook negotiate for a utility tariff for one of their data centers, and we're seeing local governments explore the potential of using their buying power in terms of the amount of electricity that they use to ask their utility to provide them with a special rate that includes more renewables. Power purchase agreements. This is one of the most common ways for local governments to purchase solar and purchase renewables, in many ways because the federal tax credit is only available to tax-paying entities, and local governments and nonprofits not paying taxes essentially pay a bit of a premium there for solar as opposed to a tax-paying entity. And so in those states that allow for third-party ownership, you often see local governments contract with a solar installer who takes all of those incentives and then offers a discounted price for the local government through a power purchase agreement for the renewable energy project or the solar project that is installed. So again, in those states where that's allowed, a common way for local governments to procure solar. And then one of the most complicated that we're seeing local governments and many corporations use is what's called a virtual power purchase agreement. And I'm not going to walk through this diagram here, but basically it is a way to set up a financial transaction with a renewable energy project that could be located anywhere where the local government, in this case, or a corporation would say, I'll guarantee that you get say 5 cents a kilowatt hour for any of the power that you sell into the market. And that long-term contract allows that project to get built. And then in return, that project says, well, I think I'm going to get 6 or 7 cents on the wholesale market. And so if you're willing to sign with me an agreement that says you'll guarantee that I get 5, anytime I get more than 5 cents, I'll give that to you, the local government or corporation. If I get less than that, then you agree to pay me. And most of the way that these have been structured is that it has been a money-making proposition or energy savings proposition for the corporation or the local government. And so then those payments that come into the local government then are used to offset costs of their own electricity. So it's a way to virtually sign a power purchase agreement with a generator that could be located anywhere by signing that financial transaction. However, the legal sort of hurdles, so everyone's comfortable with that type of energy swap contract, can be complicated, but it's been done, and it's sort of an interesting, sort of more innovative way to hedge your electricity prices and buy renewables. And then community solar. This is where you have a large project, typically a large project installed somewhere within the community, and then those shares in quotation marks in that project and credits on folks' bills for participating in the community solar project are distributed across a large number of customers. So it's a way for rentals, LMI household renters, LMI households, and others who couldn't otherwise install solar on their roof to take some of the benefits of solar. And where we've seen local governments potentially be involved is serving as an anchor tenant, so to speak, of a community solar project, where they agree to buy a certain percentage of the project so that the project knows that it has a certain amount that it's able to sell those credits to. And then sometimes that can then decrease the costs available to other ratepayers who are participating in the community solar project. So just some of the considerations for all these various pathways, the additionality question in terms of just buying RECs, which I think everyone here is looking to go beyond that, and what I'll get into in a minute, and sort of how do we get solar, how do we actually procure this stuff for our own rooftops? Thinking about the local impacts, the complexity of the transactions, your sort of local or your in-house legal and technical expertise. Some of these pathways are only allowed in some markets, and then thinking about your ability to save money and hedge against future price volatility in electricity markets. So in order to get started on that like general procurement process, you sort of think about like what's the goal and the priority of buying solar or renewables. How do you quantify your current and future energy use? So how much should you be buying? What resources do you have internally, and do you need external resources to make something like this happen? Who are your stakeholders? And then think about the procurement pathway. And I'm going to get into more detail now with my remaining time here, making sure I'm still on time, and talk about on-site solar. So the American Cities Climate Challenge has put together a great resource. Encourage you all to sort of follow that hyperlink. Again, I'll share this deck. But they sort of map out a pathway that I've used with hundreds of local governments literally across the country, and sort of helping them navigate how do you do procurement for solar. And so again, these are fairly straightforward, like in terms of forming your team, what is the goal, where do you want the solar to go, evaluating the potential for solar on those different sites, assessing the economics and ownership models that you want to pursue. Some of the above sort of pathways to getting solar installed. Then there's running the solicitation process, and then of course monitoring the system over time and making sure that someone's set up to do that, and then sharing the results. So it's not uncommon for that entire process to take about a year. In terms of identifying the sites and what the economic potential is at the sites, and then distributing the RFP, making sure everybody has time to respond to the request for proposal, evaluating those responses, negotiating and signing the contract, whether it's a PPA or an engineering, procurement, and construction contract. And then, of course, getting the system installed, which can take time as well. And sometimes there are delays that are outside the control of the local government and even the solar installer. And in particular, we've seen in terms of COVID-related delays in terms of getting different pieces of equipment, and potentially delays in getting the interconnection approved by the utility. So it's not uncommon for that to take about a year from start to finish. And I think you'll hear more from local governments. Look forward to hearing from the panel and sort of their experience and sort of how long it took, and sort of what their lessons learned are. So in terms of forming your team, like some of the questions, sort of who's going to oversee this process from within the local government. So who's the decision maker on what ownership model? Who's going to help develop the RFP and be the point person to negotiate those contracts, to help prioritize like what the goals are? Do you want a local installer, or do you want the lowest price bidder, or do you want the most qualified bidder? There's a lot to sort of think through, and sort of who's going to manage that. And then really important is engaging and running the local stakeholder engagement process. So local community members will have lots of thoughts on solar, some positive and some negative. So who's going to run that process and manage that process? It's often the sustainability person who is leading the charge. Sometimes if there's an energy manager, obviously that person should be involved. Facility managers, because where the project is going, you need someone who's familiar with that building and knows what's going on at those sites and those locations. And then in addition, you need the finance department, the legal department to review the contracts, and then the procurement office to make sure that you're following and fitting a solar procurement in with the regular required local government procurement processes. So there's a lot of folks that sort of need to be engaged, and it's important to say to know who's going to have the time to manage and run that process. And many folks hire an outside consultant to help them walk through that process, sometimes referred to as an owner's agent, to be there as an expert to provide guidance to any of those stakeholders. Focus a bit here on stakeholder engagement. Often the issues and the questions that come up are, so where's the solar going to go? Sometimes it's that there are a number of different buildings in the community that are within the local government that's like, hey, I want solar on my roof. Why aren't you putting solar on the school? Or why aren't you putting solar on the fire station? Or I want it to go on the library. So how are you going to decide? Sometimes it's through feasibility, which I'll get to in a minute. But there's also just, were there prior procurements and you already put solar on a bunch of other sites and now it's someone else's turn? Are there priority sites for visibility reasons, either where you don't want it to be visible because it's in a neighborhood where it would be highly visible and the neighbors don't want it there? Or are there priority locations to provide some of the benefits to LMI customers? Certainly there are equity impacts in terms of have there been other projects in other communities that have maybe been faced with an unfair energy burden, and now this solar project has implications there? Or are there implications of providing some of the benefits of the project to communities that maybe have felt the burden of a greater energy burden in the past? I also wouldn't underestimate the myths and misconceptions that are still out there around solar in terms of noise and glare and toxic chemicals or recycling. I still sometimes hear that like it takes longer to, there's more embedded energy in making solar than it can, pay back in terms of the energy it generates, which is just a total myth. And it hasn't been true since the 1960s. So there's still those misconceptions out there. Solar canopies are becoming quite popular in terms of putting them on parking lots. Right now, steel prices are making the economics of canopies sometimes challenging, but that isn't I don't believe that's a permanent issue. Some people really like them. Like, yeah, we have a giant parking lot. Why not cover it for, and protect it from snow and rain and shade and keep the cars cool in the summer? Others say they don't like the look of them. So it's just really being aware of that. And finally, trees. So with any solar project, there is the potential that a couple of trees might need to be trimmed to reduce shading. And anytime a tree is cut down, it can generate a lot of passion within a community. I was involved in a community where there were about 18 trees that were going to be cut down across more than a dozen solar projects that were being installed across the city. The solar developers were planting, like 4 times as many trees as were being cut down to compensate for the width of the trees, the diameter breast height of the trees that were being cut. And there were, 3 hours of people commenting at a public meeting about, why can't we leave the trees in place? And so tree cover is important, but so is installing solar for all the reasons that we had talked about here. So the next step is to evaluate the solar potential. So what locations and what types of projects? So you could do rooftop projects or ground mounted projects, solar canopies. And again, I'm at schools, libraries, capped landfills, where's it going to go? And in terms of feasibility assessments, again, many hire a local consultant to help conduct that independent analysis of, do we think solar would work here? But there's also, and these are all hyperlinked here, again, when I share the slide deck, but Rocky Mountain Institute has put together a municipal solar site selection tool. There's the NREL PV Watts tool, the EPA has a tool, and then Google Project Sunroof has a tool. And I worked with OKI and they did some solar mapping as well. So the OKI resource, if that's still available, is also a way to sort of check availability and do you think solar is going to even work? And then you need to start collecting the data. So how old is the roof? What are the site plans? Can the roof support solar, the weight of a solar PV system? Typically the answer is yes, but you need to check electricity usage over time and what the electricity rates are so that you can conduct sort of what are the economics of putting a project where, because some sites might be better than others. You could just release an RFP to say, these are the sites we want, and leave it up to the solar developers to tell you what they think is available at those sites. That is an alternative approach to this, is instead of doing all this yourself, you could say, look, here are the sites, tell us what you think. It can just be harder to evaluate sort of the different offers that you're getting if you don't have a sense going in of what the potential might be at those sites, or you might be disappointed or get a surprising offer, and you may not know why if you haven't done some of this homework. So assessing the economics and the different ownership options, and again, direct ownership versus third-party ownership. Most local governments go with the third-party ownership so they don't have to own and operate the system themselves, and they just get the energy savings, and then the tax credit sort of is embedded in those savings because the developer is able to take advantage of them, versus the direct ownership option. But when you're looking at what the economics are, sort of what's the size of the system, what are the upfront costs, electricity usage and rate structure over time. And there's a detailed model that NREL has put out called the System Advisor model. It's fairly complex, but you can actually do sort of a project pro forma through that if you wanted to on your own. And then making sure that you're taking into account state incentives and net metering rules when you're running the economic analysis. So now finally we come to running the procurement process. So I definitely coordinate with the local procurement office. Sort of what does that procurement process look like? Do you want to do a request for qualifications where you sort of pre-qualify a number of solar installers to then respond to the RFP? It's sort of an extra step, but something that some local governments have considered. And a request for proposal is where you tell them the sites, and we want proposals for these locations, versus a request for information, which is potentially saying, okay, here's all our available locations. You tell us where you think solar could go. And then in terms of some of the broad or basic contents of the RFP to include is sort of why you're doing the procurement, so the installer has a good sense of sort of how they should be prioritizing and thinking about the different sites, the scope of work that you want them to undertake, what the schedule is, sort of when you're hosting a bidders meeting, when you're doing the Q&A process, when it's due, when you're expecting the projects to come online, what form you want the response to be in. Resumes and experience and references, and detailed cost information, making sure that you're telling the developers how they're going to be evaluated, what's the evaluation criteria, how are you weighting the different categories, whether it's price or experience. I've seen some communities pick an installer based on price. And then that price turned out to be unrealistic for a number of reasons. And they sort of wish that they had instead selected the installer that had a slightly higher price, but had more direct local government installation experience. So those are things to consider. And then attachments, and then, submitting a model power purchase agreement along with the RFP. So installers know sort of what they're getting into, and what the starting point is for those contract negotiations. And then you award the contract, and then finalize the negotiations with that agreement. And that's where you want to engage with your inside legal counsel. Sometimes consultants can also provide that level of support, or outside legal counsel to review those contracts. This slide just sort of goes over briefly some of the benefits and sort of risks that are allocated in those agreements and what to think about. And so under a power purchase agreement, the benefits that go to the project owner are the tax credit potentially the REC or renewable energy credit incentive, unless those RECs are going to the local government. And then the PPA contract revenue that they sign with the local government. And then the town local government gets a low cost long-term contract for solar power, and typically includes a performance guarantee, sort of guaranteeing that generation over time. What are the risks? Most of them fall on the project owner or the solar developer in terms of a PPA. So they if they're keeping the RECs, the REC price and regulatory risk, low risk, but municipal default risk. Project performance risk is all in the developer. They have to maintain and operate the system and meet the performance guarantee. And then they put all the upfront costs in terms of permitting, development, operations and maintenance, and all those associated risks. So it's really all on the developer, which is a good thing for the local government. The risks to the local government potentially is that there's some sort of regulatory change in net metering or PPA rules that would make the agreement not valid any longer. I've never really seen that happen. It's been proposed, but then walked back on a couple of locations within states. But typically these types of agreements are allowed to continue on even if there's a change in regulations. Potential electricity or market pricing risk, depending on the rate of the PPA that you sign. And then just incentive timing risk, just putting that there, and that you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of the incentives that are available now and not necessarily waiting for the incentives to get better or something to that effect. Because as the price of solar goes down, the incentives tend to also go down. And then finally, monitoring and sharing results. So you can't sort of underestimate that somebody, especially if you own and operate the system, is checking on that system always. We've run into, instances where if it wasn't a PPA, where the installer was monitoring this stuff, that the disconnect switch was thrown and nobody noticed for a couple of months, and that was just lost revenue and lost generation. If someone isn't just really, just keeping an eye and monitoring the system performance, but then also keeping an eye on the solar installer under a third-party PPA agreement to make sure that they're doing their job as well. Documenting lessons learned is important so that, if there's staff turnover within the local government, that folks know sort of what they did last time, what they would do differently, because, you're not likely to get solar installed on every single place where you could today. And so it's often involves running multiple procurements. Like, this project makes sense for us to do today. 2 years from now, we'll run another procurement process to put solar in a few other locations. As costs come down, some of those sites that were marginal in terms of economic returns now look great. And so we'll run another procurement there. So you're going to be likely doing this multiple times. So really sort of documenting those lessons is important. And then being publicly sharing success. But again, there's a nuance there in that if you aren't maintaining ownership of the renewable energy certificate, you may not be able to say explicitly, we're buying renewable energy, but you can say things like, we installed solar on our local government locations. We're, promoting local solar markets. We're contributing renewable energy, getting onto the grid. And we're supporting local jobs in the solar industry. So there's a lot of good things that you can say, even if you don't have or own the renewable energy certificate, but just something to be aware of. And so with that, I think that wraps up my background. Glad that I still kept to the appropriate amount of time here. And I think I'm happy to. I'll leave it to Andy and others if we want to take a few questions now, or I know we have the time blocked off later. So I know I'm looking forward to hearing from our local governments with direct experience from this. So I will stop sharing my screen and pause there. Turn it back to you, Andy.
All right. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, I think we can pause for some questions. One question I had, Chad, and it dealt with, a lot of the details and particulars of a solar purchase or renewable energy credit purchase PPAs, there's a lot of specialization structure to those deals that a lot of jargon, and you talked about many communities might want to hire an outside consultant to help walk them through the process, help translate a lot of that jargon and deal structures into common language. How do communities, or where should communities look to find these specialized renewable or solar consultants?
Yeah, so we often see local governments put out a procurement, another procurement, to hire an energy consultant or an energy expert to help guide them in procuring renewable energy options. This is where I have to be careful because that is what I do. So we typically respond to those procurements. We've also seen a handful of regional planning organizations bring on board a consultant under an umbrella contract, or sometimes a few consultants. So they bring on like two or three different consultants, and then local governments can ride that contract to utilize whoever has been selected by the local government to help them in that process. So that's one way we've seen regional planning organizations like OKI play a role in making it easier for local governments to access that expertise by providing them with a sort of set of consultants. Otherwise, yeah, just through networks. Some of the support is available for free through SolSmart. So communities that are participating in SolSmart can absolutely reach out to get free technical assistance from the folks that are participating in the SolSmart program. And then we're also hopeful there are other DOE grant programs and initiatives and folks like at the National Renewable Energy Lab and other places that are also available to provide that type of support. And I think organizations like the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and the American Cities Climate Challenge, like there's tons of also free resources to reach out to, across all sorts of different networks to get some help for free on this as well.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That helps clear that up. Also, I wanted to thank you for mentioning our solar tool. As a tool we produced back with the Solar Ready project, and it is still active. Travis Miller put a link in the chat box, so if you're looking to take advantage of that tool, you can check out that link in the chat box. There is also a question in the chat about whether local governments can take advantage of PACE, if PACE is available in their state, which I believe it's available in most states across the country, at least for commercial projects. Is that something that's available to local governments?
Yeah, it's a good question. So PACE is property assessed clean energy, and this is where it allows the financing of the project to be embedded in sort of the property tax bill payments. And it's for commercial entities or for residential customers. And usually it's enabled at the state level, and then it's up to local governments to adopt and approve that's a typical PACE structure, is that it's enabled at the state level, and then local governments choose whether or not to adopt it. In terms of local governments being able to utilize that financing source, I don't think there's anything inherently that says that you couldn't. You would have to check the local regulations and the state regulations to say how that would be structured. And then there is usually a series of financing entities, banks that participate in PACE and offer a loan product through a PACE program. The question that I always, or it comes back to, is that is the the rate, the interest rate on the PACE loan, is that going to be better or worse than, say, a bond rate, or the rate that the local government would otherwise be financing a project like this if you wanted to own and operate it? And the issue that I've seen with PACE, at least at the residential and commercial level, is that currently the way interest rates are is that the PACE loans aren't necessarily competitive with a home equity loan, a home equity line of credit, a municipal bond, or just a general commercial construction loan that's embedded in whatever improvements the company is looking to make on its building, that they can often just get a better rate and not have to go through the hassle, maybe isn't the right word, but the process of utilizing PACE. So it's a great tool. No reason not to enable that tool. At the moment where interest rates are, I don't usually see it being a better deal than other financing options. But everyone should look at that on their own to determine what they think the best option is.
Yeah. We just had a comment in the chat that the local port authority could be an option for financing. A bonded bond fund through the port authority can offer competitive rates for financing.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's a great idea. Definitely keep those options open. And then you don't necessarily need that if you're going with a third-party ownership model. Like if you're in Ohio where you can do that, then you don't need any upfront costs, depending on what you want. But if you're looking to buy the system, yeah, there's, local governments have a lot of different options available to them in terms of financing. And sometimes there's even a local foundation or a local entity that might be willing to put up a grant to help buy down the cost. We've seen local governments sort of, raise money, so to speak, or utilize grant dollars that are available from somewhere to potentially buy down the cost of a system as well.
Great suggestions. Thanks. We're gonna move on to our panel here, and as I share my screen again, and we will if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we will have time for question and answers after our local panel presentation. And then following the panel presentation, we have TJ White with the Center for Local Government, who is putting together a local group purchase potentially for solar. So if you're a community and don't feel like going it alone, there may be some like-minded communities out there that you can latch onto to procure solar. So, but right now we have a local panel of 3 communities that have procured solar, and they're going to share with us their experiences, what they've gone through in their recent solar procurement experiences. First up, we have Tom Carroll, the village manager with the village of Silverton. They installed solar on their town hall, a newly recently renovated building to make it very energy efficient. And then just a couple of years ago now, installed solar on the roof with the goal of making the facility a net zero energy building. And we have Dave Kennedy, city manager with Loveland, who is included solar in their new public works building that they're building out there. And we have Michael Forrester, who's the Director of the Office of Environment and Sustainability for the City of Cincinnati. And the city has procured a solar farm out east of town, Highland County, I believe. With the goal of, purchasing 100% solar energy for all of the city's municipal electricity needs. So I will ask you all a few questions here, and then after I go through my prepared questions, we'll have hopefully some interesting questions in the chat and in the question and answer box. So as you think of them, I encourage everyone to put questions in the chat. First off, since I'm a planner by trade, and we always gravitate towards goal setting, what was the process for determining the goals for your solar project? Did you formalize the goals and write them down, or was it just kind of came together as a general set of requirements for the project? What was that process like at the beginning for determining what do you want out of your solar project? And I'll let Tom, why don't you take the lead on this?
Thanks, Andy. Silverton received from OKI actually an energy grant. I think the funding source for that sustainability plan was the Duke class benefit settlement. But that allowed us in 2018 to develop a community-wide sustainability plan. And in that plan, we identified a number of things that both the municipality could do on its own, as well as what we would try and do to help our residents, the 5,000 or so people who are our taxpayers, but also want to do more for themselves sustainability-wise. So our basis or our foundation was that OKI, Greater Cincinnati Energy Alliance funded plan. So when we purchased a funeral home to renovate it into our town hall, we spent $2.1 million on that project. We purchased it in 2017 and renovated it and completed the renovation in 2018. We already renovated that facility without the solar array on it, but we put in LED lighting, we put in a geothermal heating and cooling system. So we had already done a number of investments just through the renovation process that had a pretty high level of energy efficiency, which really made it very attainable for us a year later to come along and put a solar array on our town hall building. The goal of that solar array is for it to become there's Andy put up a pre-renovation project photo. The goal is to, and that's what it looks like with solar and completed renovation. The goal is, given the 114 panels that we put on our building, is to make our town hall, our municipal center, a net zero building. We did not quite achieve that after a year of data, but we have looked at our building envelope and made a number of insulation improvements that we think, some conservation improvements that we think will help us get there. So very close, but not quite. And so stay tuned. But either way, the solar array has paid for itself, and our community is residents are very pleased with what we've done.
Okay, and Dave, why don't you share with us how your solar project came about?
Okay, well, I guess we were on the cusp of beginning the construction of 3 significant public facilities. The Public Works building, a new parking garage, and a new fire station. And it basically, we got to a point where we realized that someone And we're also in this area, as Tom knows, we're surrounded by all of the school campus, the entire Loveland City school campuses located within the city, none of which have any type of solar array in any form or fashion. So it just seemed like the Public Works building, which is located on Loveland Madeira Road, would be the best way to be sort of dip our toe into the process and learn how to do it. So we didn't do the standard procurement because it was part of a package with the construction of the building, though we ultimately went out to a different vendor for the supply. And we did a pretty good analysis of what we were getting and so on and so forth. And of course, making sure that we can do this without any structural modifications to the roof. But I think in this particular community, it was just about finally someone setting that tone and learning how to do it. And then that trend is set. This particular building is not one with a lot of high visibility, mostly by the way it's positioned and the fact that the array would all fit on the rear pitch of the roof. But I'm not one who, I'm not trying to hide it, but there's certainly some feeling that there, that as he was talking about before, the unattractiveness of it. So for us, it was just a way to set the tone, begin to show that we can be a leader in the community. You could see a ripple effect. Obviously, it'll be on the 2 remaining buildings that we are planning on building, the parking garage and the new fire station. The school, we would hope would follow suit at some point in time. So at this point in time, yeah, we did all the analysis. We realized what it'll save to us. It was a little bit of a few unknowns because we're replacing a building that was built in 1976 to try to make sure that we're dealing with apples to apples as far as what the energy usage is. I caution everyone with council when I made this presentation that there's a lot of unknowns on these. These are much more efficient buildings than what was in that 1976 building that the city sort of inherited. So that was sort of it, to sort of set the groundwork, set the tone, someone be the leader in the community as far as how this can be done. And I would certainly think this will be standard operating procedure in the 2 remaining buildings that are right around the corner to be constructed in the city.
Great, thanks. And Michael, the city obviously, City of Cincinnati obviously has a much larger energy profile. The dozens of buildings that the city owns and operates, that the city went a different path, one of actually partnering and developing a solar farm. So why don't you talk about the goals set by the city that led down that pathway?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, really, the city of Cincinnati is kind of governed by the Green Cincinnati Plan, which is our community-wide document to make the city of Cincinnati a cleaner, greener, more resilient, and equitable city. And in that plan, we lay out the goal to achieve an 80% carbon reduction by 2050. And in order to do that, obviously, one of the things that we're going to need to do is both reduce our energy consumption and go big on renewable energy. And we have a history of doing that. We currently have 28 solar installations across the city at city facilities, which represents 1.8 megawatts worth of power. To put that in perspective, that's just a little bit larger than what's in the zoo's parking lot. So when you put all of ours together, it's a fairly large array. And so we installed our first array in 2009. And we're looking to do an additional 2 megawatts on site at 10 facilities. So, while we're going big out in Highland County, we're also trying to execute here at home. And so, yeah, in that Green Cincinnati Plan, it does explicitly state, in addition to the carbon reduction goals, that we develop a 25 megawatt array offsite to help power city operations. But in the process of developing that, we realized that if we used our community choice aggregation program in partnership with our city energy consumption, we could achieve a much larger array. And as a result of that scale, achieve significant price savings. So because we got up to 100 megawatts, then the price per megawatt hour that the array produced significantly dropped, which made it even more financially feasible for us. Our array is predicted over the course of the 20-year contract to save approximately $1.8 million. We also retain the renewable energy credits for the array, so we can make the renewable claims. And we've also, and this is really nerdy, so I'm really sorry, we also retain the capacity rights to the array, which we successfully bid into the PJM marketplace for 2022, which means that there will be a pretty significant direct check revenue stream coming to the city from our regional wholesale grid operator, which that we built the contract so that we could do it. We didn't know if it was going to happen, and it did. And so that is even a financial gravy coming to the city, making this even a more cost-effective array for the city.
Great, and that's, you know, I didn't know about the partnering with the aggregation choice program, but that also introduces some variability or some risks. How was the city able to project and make sure that they had the participation?
This is the fun business model that was built, this whole thing. So the city of Cincinnati directly has the power purchase agreement with the developer for its own electricity use. So we are the ones on the hook for that energy. But for the aggregation program, the power purchase agreement is with the aggregation provider. So if for some reason the aggregation program was to go away due to a regulatory act or something along those lines, the risk of that falls with the aggregation provider. So it's a series of, gosh, I want to say 6 contracts working together in order to assure that the energy the energy is both delivered to the city accounts, delivered to the residential accounts, and that there's power purchase agreements for the 2 separate arrays. So 35 megawatts is for city accounts and 65 megawatts is for the residential accounts. And they're actually separate power purchase agreements that work together to give us that scale. And then we worked with the aggregation provider, Dynegy, to bid the full 100 megawatt array into the capacity market, which they did on our behalf.
Wow, lots of mechanisms all working together. Probably took a lot of effort and a lot of expertise to set that up. So how did you go about finding experts to help work through all of those decisions on the city's behalf?
So I'm sure, like Tom, and I'm sure and Dave mentioned as well, you know, it takes a lot of leadership and confidence from your leadership, your elected officials, the mayor, John Cranley here in the city of Cincinnati, to have trust in you and realize that you're not going to necessarily have all of the answers in front of you day one. So it's, you know, working with your finance department, working with your law department, and really kind of allowing them to take the journey with you. You know, I've said, if anybody's heard me talk about this, I'll say it again. It really is about building the airplane while you're flying it and being okay with that. You know, you're not going to have all of the answers. You're not going to know exactly what's going on. And frankly, it doesn't really matter until the contract is signed. You know, you can walk all the way down to the line and then you can say this isn't a good deal and you can walk away. And I feel like a lot of municipalities and a lot of departments often get caught up in once the process is started, we have to go all the way down, and you don't. The city was prepared to walk away at any point in time. But as far as what you're saying around expertise, we retained outside counsel who is familiar with power purchase agreements. And we also utilized the American Cities Climate Challenge team, Rocky Mountain Institute, to put these packages together. If anybody's looking for a great example of procurement packages, RFPs, RFIs, all that sort of stuff. Chad brought this up before, but cityrenewables.org really does have a treasure trove of information that you can just grab and put your name on, and kind of go from there.
Great advice. Great advice. Dave, why don't you talk us through how your initial solar purchase with the Public Works building came about, and who are the experts that you listened to, and how did they help you get to the finish line of evaluating whether the solar was a good fit for that building?
Well, like I said, we had a package that came with the builder that on it. It just didn't seem to me to provide enough information. So we reached out, and we actually worked with Melinka out of Milford, and it was very educational for us, difference in realizing that the difference between more of a residential grade versus more of a commercial grade. And it was much more educational in terms of how long, what we would contribute back to the grid, how long it would be until at such time we would pay off our initial upfront cost, at what point in the life expectancy of the panels, which is greater than 30, but the other unit that we would have to replace at around 15. They were also very helpful in reaching out with the concerns for the entire team of the city that got involved, including the fire chief. What kind of rapid shutdown? What would we do in case of a fire at this building? And so on and so forth. So they ended up being both who we utilized for the project, but from an educational standpoint, dealing with someone like me who was as unknowing as anyone that's probably walked the face of the earth. And I'm still not saying that I know it, but it really brought home the benefits to where we could say, wow, we will contribute, it will cut our usage down from what we were looking at, cutting our usage from about 28,000 kilowatts an hour down is so significantly the changes that we would be able to be 85%, of course, the year would be of our power for the building would be on the solar versus 15% on the grid, and the explanations in that. And it was just, once we really started putting those numbers down, it wasn't really over the K. It would be about a savings of $40,000 over the life of the project. It was setting the standard. Once we knew it was going to work, once we knew it was savings, once we knew it would fulfill any electrical needs that our public works department has, accepting the fact that there was a lot of unknowns because we just don't know what this building the needs are. We ended up with 40 solar panels, and the wattage. I really, what I learned the most from dealing with Melik is, for us, the best indicator was, when I was trying to compare them, was that we really needed to look at the cost per watt, where the other proposal may have had more panels. At the end of the day, it came down to the cost per watt, because when you're dealing with cost per watt, it's how quick are we going to retire our initial upfront cost, and then how little we will be able to have to rely on the grid. So that was a pretty important factor for me, because I think the only thing I really even bring to this whole panel is the fact that I could not have been more green about it, and see now that the next building that will likely follow, which is the parking garage right outside this back window here, this is a very viable alternative for that. Now we'll go from a building that is relatively hidden on Loveland Deer Road to one that sees thousands of people over the course of even a week. And I think that will really set the tone for what this can be done. And I think for me, it was just the education. The savings is important. The greenhouse effect of what we do, the carbon footprint, that is all very important. But I think, I'm not trying to belittle any of those, but I think being able to finally let the city set that tone, that this is real, this is something that we can do. I think that was pretty much the most important. But I will say, I'm not Melik, who I dealt with, they were eye openers with me. So very, very helpful.
Terrific, terrific. Now, Tom, you had an existing building. So what was the process like, and who helped you navigate that, all the choices that needed to be made in putting solar panels on Town Hall?
Yeah, it's pretty easy to get a pretty good high level budget number from any solar vendor. If you give them your address and you give them 12 months of your utility bills, they can model how much energy you use in a year and how much of your rooftop can be utilized for solar. And those aren't budget numbers, but they're real high level and they're pretty accurate. So it's really not that hard to go ahead and figure out with any building. And Malink would do this for Dave. Pro Lighting and Solar would do it for us. There are a number of vendors who would do this. Just give them your bill and give them your address and let them figure out, you know, what amount of solar could be on the building. And then you can get into the financial analysis that Chad talked about. You know, I think like Dave, and I appreciate his humility. I feel the same way. If I can figure this out, anyone can figure this out, right? It's like anything that's a new procurement. We put out an RF or a bid for a backhoe this year. I don't know anything about backhoes. I now know more about backhoes than I care to know, but it's the same thing with solar. You know, this is a bit intimidating, perhaps for me, and I think for many local government officials. We don't get rewarded for trying something and it not working out, right? That's just the way government works. But to Michael's point earlier, you can go all the way with this analysis and then decide it's not right for you. But to Dave's point earlier, I think this should be standard operating procedure for any building renovation, for any new construction, for any fleet vehicle that you buy. We should be looking at, is there a lower carbon or zero emissions alternative to this? We're reaching the point where we need to start investing in decarbonization. And I just don't think there's any debate about that. There shouldn't be any debate about that. And we're spending money that we're already spending. We already replace vehicles. We already buy power. We already, you know, renovate structures and have to replace our heating and cooling systems or our lighting systems. So we might as well take advantage of the dollars that we're already spending and deploy those in a way that is both cost effective. And that's the thing that, you know, just think this through. There's a public good and lack of pollution, but there's also a tremendous amount of economic benefit that we get from this. So to me, this is kind of a no-brainer. It's intimidating to start, but like Dave, like me, Michael, I think was born an expert in this area, but like Dave and me, I think just be curious and learn and be ready to ask good questions. And it's really a lot of fun to learn about it.
Great, great. So in Chad's presentation, he talked about various ownership models. Do you purchase the panels? You know, do you do a power purchase agreement or lease the panels? Do you buy into a larger solar project? What went into each of your communities coming down with this is the right model for us, and you know, what were the factors that you weighed in that?
I'll kick this off because we've done all of them. We have used capital. We have done power purchase agreements. We have obviously done our large offsite power purchase agreement. And really it's a case by case basis. I mean, generally, I would say from a city's perspective, it gives you more flexibility to just outright own it. And so if you're building a building, you know, incorporating that into the build project makes a lot of sense. We did that with our D3 police station, which is the first net zero police station built in the country. But we've also done power purchase agreements. And those are great because you don't have to put any upfront money in it. And so, you know, the risks that you run with that is that it's a long-term contract. Are you going to be in the building that long? What does that look like? And then you also need to be careful about the escalator rate. Oftentimes, the contractor will put in a certain percentage over time that the rate of the power purchase agreement will raise. They'll say that it's to match the historic 25-year electricity growth price. And typically it's about 2 to 2.5%. So those are a couple of things you need to watch out, but really it's a case by case basis and a project by project basis.
And I'll just jump in. We did a similar analysis where we looked at a power purchase agreement. The benefit that Michael mentioned, that Chad mentioned earlier, is we would not have to come out of pocket. We would basically be simply buying power from power panels on a roof that somebody else invested. For us, it was a $100,000 investment in our solar array. So a power purchase agreement is not terribly complicated, but the bigger the project, the less those overhead costs are. So it was the analysis was pretty easy for us that would be far more complicated of a solution than what we needed for a $100,000 array. The other thing I'll mention is at the time we put our $100,000 array, part of how we paid for that was we issued a $250,000 debt instrument. So 100,000 of that was for our solar array. We also invested in LED lights, street lights at the same time that we did that. So we spent $260,000 on energy efficiency between the solar array and the LED lights. The interest rate on our $250,000 private placement bond for what was a 4.1% all-in total interest cost. As Chad said earlier, the cost of funds are very affordable. The debt service on that 10-year bond is $31,000 a year. Our solar array and our LED lights save us about $29,500 a year. So in other words, the savings for things that we already were spending almost cover the entire 10-year note. So we have to increase our operating budget $1,500 in a year, which we could do. And in the 10.5-year mark, everything that we've done is going to lead to a $31,000 or $29,000 savings starting in 2029. So if you just do the mathematics on this, the economics, it often really makes great sense. And that's even treating the economic or the environmental benefits at a zero, which is not correct. But that's how we made that decision to just buy it.
We were similar to what Tom said. We had refinanced a considerable amount of existing debt that we had to accommodate refinancing existing debt, taking advantage of the interest rates. That debt included the funding that we would use for the new public works building. Our array is only $40,000, so we rolled that into the cost of the debt service that we received for the building. The savings we had across the board in refinancing the debt was significant to all cities. That public works building accommodates many, many funds. So when we factor in how debt is going to be paid back off, we can break that down amongst many funds, water and stormwater and sanitary and all the different funds that utilize that building. So at the end of the day, it just made the most sense for the city just to do a straight out purchase of the panels.
Terrific. Thanks. So, what all of these decisions kind of lead down to the RFP, the decision, okay, we're going to go for it. Let's get bids. So what advice or what was critical to getting to that point to say, okay, these are our parameters, this is what we want, and this is how we need to structure this RFP. What input, what advice, what resources did you use to get to that point? I think because from that point, the RFP, going through the RFP process and selecting a bidder is pretty straightforward. Cities do that day in, day out for all manner of things, backhoes and what have you. But it's getting to that point of having a drafted RFP that's tricky.
So the tool I used is called plagiarism. I just borrowed one from somebody else, and so we do not have to reinvent the wheel. Anyone can have a look at Silverton's RFP. I'm sure Michael will share his. He mentioned the Rocky Mountain Institute. They have just plug in your name. It's really not that hard. That's always been my secret is plagiarizing other public documents. I guess if it's a public document, it's not plagiarism, but just, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Our bidding process, Andy, and I'll just say this one thing, we knew we were going to spend $100,000. So the way we bid it is said to the marketplace, our budget is $100,000. Give us, meet all these requirements that we specified in the RFP, but we are going to award the contract to the company that gives us the most kilowatt hours for the $100,000. And it was because that was our upper limit. Just that's the contract. It's $100,000, and we had a really good response from the marketplace as a result of that.
As I said, we didn't go through the standard format. For me, it was a great unknown where we would be at price-wise. I was looking ahead already to both the parking garage and the fire station. So for me, it was suitability, it was stability of the existing structure. It was how quick can I pay this back? How quick will my original cost be paid off? That was pretty much the major thing. I had to deal with some old school technology within the public works department. I think Tom knows what I'm talking about there, which is just, what do you mean? And once we sort of conquered that, the rest was pretty easy. And I think for me, it was just an educational moving forward for what we'll be doing on the parking facility. That was the key element. That will likely be even less panels. It will have very little electrical need, but I think it'll also be a bit of a beacon for how government can do something. That's really the most important part of it, because as Tom knows, the amount of people in our downtown district, especially where this parking garage is going to be, it should really, I believe it should really set the tone. But that parking garage won't even have gates with today's technology as far as parking meters. So we're really only talking about taking care of the lighting needs is the main need in that building.
Yeah, I know, Michael, you had the shout out for Rocky Mountain Institute, and there was another one, Climate Cities.
Cityrenewables.org. That's
City
kind of a
Renewables
repository of different RFPs that RMI maintains. So like Tom said, you don't have to reinvent this wheel. This is out there. This is totally doable. Tom can provide RFPs. I'm sure Dave's got some information. I'm happy to share anything. So really, it's a matter of deciding to do it and asking for help, and people are going to step up.
Just to follow up on Michael's point, in addition, if even all that offer of plagiarized material isn't enough to make you comfortable, TJ White will talk in a minute or two about what the Center for Local Government is looking at doing, where we all kind of jump into the deep end. It's not that deep, but we jump into the deep end together and do a shared service municipal purchase of solar. And I think if you don't have a lot of staff capacity or time, that's going to be a real way to get some bandwidth increase, and to maybe do a solar project as a trial balloon like Dave's doing. You start with your one facility, and then prove success and then go to the next one the next year.
Terrific. That's an amazing segue, but I did have one more question. And it's centered around, okay, now that you have your solar project in hand, how have you gone about telling that story and promoting that to your residents, to other communities? You know, what is important to your community in being able to tell that story?
Well, I think it's got to be a piece of a larger puzzle. For example, the lights just went out because we put in all of these motion detector light systems in every room. So I'm now sitting in the dark. So I think part of it just needs to be part of a picture. We have a tree environment committee in the city, and we've been working with them through so many aspects. A part of that environmental part. I don't know that cities really went down that road. I think Tom's on the forefront of that, and I think it's important that, certainly I spent 25 years in Richmond, Ohio. We'd have never thought of doing anything like this. It just wasn't something that we thought of. We were just trying to keep the lights on and, you know, plow the streets. And I think when you get into this position where you're able to do this and realize, my goodness, it's 40 grand. This will pay itself off in X amount of years. That whole feeling, even though it may not seem like much, guess what? We're actually putting electric back into the grid, and we get a little bit of a rebate. And it's minor, but it's a good story. And I think, I hope that long after I'm gone, every building that is utilized, that they continue to do this, that this sets the tone. If I've accomplished nothing else, maybe this will be the trend, and maybe you'll see it in the school. Maybe the school begins a big capital program. They're a big part of our everyday here. Obviously, every building they own is within earshot of us. So I think it's important. And I don't know that we've accomplished any. That's what I see as the primary accomplishment. LED lightings in the downtown district was sort of our first step. And light savings devices such as this. So that's pretty important. And of course, I'm now sitting in the dark. And I also realized that I have the exact same shirt and tie on as this picture that you've got of me here. That's a little embarrassing. So just looking at this panel, a little heads up, and I would have changed my tie. Thanks, Andy. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Tom.
No.
I was just going to say that, you know, it's being the city of Cincinnati, you know, we have a fairly large microphone, so we can tell our decarbonization story. We can engage our community through the creation of the Green Cincinnati plan, public meetings. Obviously, the big solar array has attracted national attention. We've gotten spots on the Weather Channel and Mother Jones, and I was on WVXU yesterday. But really what's exciting to me is Tom and Dave's stories, because that's the ones that are going to move the actual market and actually spread, you know, solar out into the communities. You know, because these are, you know, professional city managers setting the tone for their cities, and they're sharing it with their peers here on this on webinars like this. So, I mean, that's, you know, it's great to tell the city's story and all of those sort of things. But I'm very well aware, you know, when I actually look in the region here, the ones that our communities listen to are people like Tom and Dave, because we as the city of Cincinnati are just on a very different scale. You know, a lot of city staff doesn't have an office of sustainability or a direct energy manager. And so, you know, having people like Tom and Dave step up, and people on this webinar step up and lead that charge, is really the fun story to go with.
Thank you, Michael. I would just say that I think in the next handful of years, and time is very pressing on climate change, to be honest. We have had, in my opinion, a failure of leadership at the international and national levels to do what's been necessary. So what I think is important about that is if we as local government leaders continue to wait till we are told exactly what we need to do from a policy perspective to decarbonize, we're going to be waiting potentially a long time. But we could take action on our own, within our own sphere, within our own space, utilizing the money that we already spend on energy fleets and building renovations, and lead our communities. And I would say this, the people in Silverton are very excited that we have basically a billboard on Montgomery Road that shows that this small little jurisdiction is taking a step, and we get a lot of positive momentum. I've only had 2 complaints, and they're from 2 residents who, if they're complaining to me, I know I'm doing the right thing. So those are the kind, we all have those people in our community. If they're complaining, you got it right. So the community is hungry for this kind of leadership from us at the local government level. And yes, there's political downsides. There are people who just don't accept what we're doing. But we are trying to take this to the next level and help our residents themselves go solar if they want to. And we can talk about that later, but there is a strong desire among many of our residents for local leadership, and we need to do it.
Thank you. Thanks. So we don't have any questions from the chat, but so we're going to move right on to TJ White with the Center for Local Government. And he's been working this year on putting together groups of communities to, a group purchase of solar energy. So TJ, I'll give it over to you, and you can fill us in on the details.
Awesome, thank you. Well, as Andy said, my name is TJ White. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Local Government. For those of you who are not familiar with the center, we are an organization that has been around since 1990, and we were formed by city managers and township administrators in Southwest Ohio. So my governance structure is a board of city managers and township administrators. Every program that we operate is actually operated and governed by the governments. And we were formed essentially to work with governments on managing and executing shared services, training and information sharing programs throughout the region. So some examples. There is a health insurance pool that we operate that has 18 governments. There's a solid waste and recycling collection pool that has 13. An electricity consortium for facilities, and that's a purchase consortium that has, I believe, 11 in it, and many additional similar programs. We were approached earlier this summer by Tom, actually, about the idea of seeing if there was a possibility to do a multi-government RFP for solar installation. And what I'm about to talk about actually ties in very well to some of the things that Chad was talking about earlier. You can kind of see some of these steps that Chad was talking about as they're being executed. So to give you an idea of what we're thinking about, what we're trying to do is a joint RFP for on-site solar installation. This could be roof-mounted or ground-mounted systems on-site at municipal or township facilities. We are not doing any sort of virtual PPA, nor are we doing any sort of off-site with this. And right now, this is in the very early formative stages, but the steps that we're taking are as follows. So the first, determine if there's interest from governments who are pursuing solar projects to do so jointly. We had an information meeting about this at the end of August. We are discussing the program meetings like this. I am individually talking to governments that expressed interest at that August point to get an idea of their level of interest in solar in general, where they are internally, and also at their level of interest in working together. So that's the stage I'm in now. Simultaneous to that, we're working with governments to conduct feasibility studies to identify their own solar capacity. This ties into what Chad was saying about evaluating solar potential. Molink has been doing this for a few communities. ProLight, which worked with Silverton's been doing this. Chad's company is available. We don't really specify who should be doing these audits. We just want communities to do them. I have one community that's actually doing theirs tomorrow, so I'm going out on site to visit it and watch it in person. And so, you know, as Chad was saying, we're trying to get an idea of what the power generating, the potential costs, potential savings, what other engineering factors might need to be taken into account. And I would say this is the phase where most of our interest governments are currently at. The folks that came to our initial info session were already interested in some regard in doing solar installation. It's just a matter of learning how and figuring out if they think it's right for them at the time. The next step will be to identify financing models. We talked a lot about power purchase agreements today. We talked a lot about funding out of capital. It's my belief that the individual participating communities are probably waiting to get an idea of what these initial costs would be before they take a look at whether to fund it out of capital, a power purchase agreement, or something else. So we're not really in that stage just yet where I can sit there and say, hey, we're going to be doing a PPA with this number of governments. One of the challenges that we're going to face actually is around financing. I would bet you that we're not going to get unanimity on this. We're going to have some governments who are going to want to do a PPA. It just feels it's right for them financially. Others that have the money to purchase it out of capital or whatever project they do might be of a scale where that's appropriate. And so one of the things we're going to learn as we're building this airplane on the fly, to quote Michael, is, you know, what's that going to do to our financing on this? Is that going to make the PPAs worthwhile or not, et cetera? So that is one of those lessons that we're beginning to learn out of this. And finally, benchmarking, creating a bid. City Renewables actually is a really great resource. I know it's been plugged a few times. I actually pulled Cincinnati's bid off of it yesterday. And so Michael's going to get a flurry of questions from me today or tomorrow about things. They have a bid template on there. Tom, I believe I have Silverton's bid. So yeah, I do strongly suggest checking out their toolkit. It is an excellent resource. And so I've been pulling RFPs off of that are similar in vein to ours. And so what we're doing internally at the center right now is education. Taking a look at benchmark RFPs, identifying areas that we may want to get a little bit more education on, or areas where the governments might want a little bit more education. Because after we do this feasibility study phase and after these governments get their consultant visits, they're going to be coming back with questions, and I want to make sure I can connect them to the right subject matter experts. As for a timeline, as I said, we're still pretty early in the process. We had an information meeting about a month ago today. And then this conversation. I think most of my governments are at a stage now where they're either scheduling these, they're doing the evaluation of solar potential stage, or they still might be talking to it with their city councils or township trustees, getting a temperature in the room. So I'm personally trying to one-on-one with all of the governments that initially expressed interest to try to get an idea of where they're at. And once I know that, it'll be a little bit easier to determine a timeline moving forward. But I would anticipate we would be publishing sometime probably in early 2022. So how to participate? Like I said, we're still in the early stages, so there's still plenty of time for interested governments to participate. The first thing is a little bit of a threshold requirement. Our organization was founded by city managers and township administrators, but we're funded through membership. So we would want anyone that participates in the bid by the time we publish the bid to be a member of the organization. Looking at our list of attendees, I believe most of you who are with government are actually representing governments that are members now. I see Wyoming on there. I see a couple of folks from Indian Hill, a couple of folks from Deer Park, I think. But we would want you to be a member of the Center for Local Government if you're not. And so that would be any government in Hamilton, Butler, Warren, Claremont, Montgomery, Greene, Clinton, Brown, Preble, or Miami County is eligible for membership. If you're outside one of those counties, we do actually have a affiliate membership category that we use for our health insurance pool. And I can talk to my board about leveraging that for the solar as well. The second thing is just getting with us, trying to get an idea of whether or not you've done one of these consultant reviews yet to identify what sites are appropriate and what some of the initial upfront costs are going to be. We're going to have to develop a matrix of all of the various sites across multiple governments for this. So that's the stage we're working on right now. if you just want information, I'm not going to make you join the center. I'll add you on those email lists. But if you participate and go through with the bid, then I would ask you to be a member of the organization. And then finally, I'll give you my contact information in the chat so that if anyone has questions, they can call or email. And I'm happy to answer any initial questions at this point as well. And you're muted.
Did the mute thing. Yeah, TJ, thank you. TJ's information is in the chat. So, and I think that's a great way to connect with, if nothing else, connect with other communities that are also thinking about and going through this journey, and sharing those experiences, even if and even if you may not be in Southwest Ohio, maybe a Northern Kentucky community, or in Southeast Indiana, knowing that there's other folks in the region that are doing this can be valuable to encouraging you along. So thank you. Thanks. We don't have any pending questions in the chat or that. So I want to thank all of our participants, Chad, Michael, Tom, Dave, and TJ. Thank you very much for your time this morning. A wealth of information. Please check out some of those resources. And if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to me, Andy Meyer at OKI. That's ameyer@oki.org. And I will be happy to connect you with the most appropriate resources. So thank you again for joining us this morning. And we wish you well, and go get some solar.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye now.
everyone. Bye.